Welcome everyone to FF Plus, which is usually your outlet for weekly reviews that are simple, short, and spoiler-free. But sometimes we mix things up, and today is one of those times. As always, I'm your host, Aaron White, and I'm very excited to have with me three amazing guests for a conversation about the best movies of 2023 so far. All of these guests are members of the Hollywood Critics Association, which I gratefully was just admitted to about a month ago. And so I thought it would be cool to bring some new colleagues on and some folks that I've never been able to podcast with before. So let's go through the list and meet everybody. First, we have David Bax. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I guess I should have queued them up and told them to tell us all a little bit about what you do in the film space.
Yeah, I was going to say,
don't just read my mind.
I was like, Aaron didn't tell me to, so is it presumptuous of me to plug my podcast? But I also have a podcast. It's called Battleship Pretension. It's sort of loose movie discussion, weekly movie discussion, and I review films as well at battleshippretension.com. I'm on Letterboxd at David Bax. Yeah.
Battleship Pretension was one of the probably 2 or 3 defining podcasts before I got into this space, I will have you know. Along with Film Spotting, which I think is a big one for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, we have the benefit of just having started early. We've been going since March of 2007. Yeah, a lot of people seem to know our name at least just because we got in the door before there were 10 bajillion podcasts.
That's great. We also have Meredith Loftus.
Hello, everyone. I am Meredith Loftus. I work for Paramount as a digital producer, but I just recently got accepted to the Hollywood Critics Association. I do some freelance work for Collider, Next Best Picture, and Marvelous Geeks. And I do have a podcast that is on hiatus for a while. It's called Fangirl Forum, where I get together friends of mine and we just fangirl about movies, TV shows, whatever we're just really in the mood for. I have like a 2-hour-long episode about Taylor Swift, so that's a conversation for another time. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great. And you have been doing a lot of coverage on Ted Lasso recently, is that right?
Yes. I also do some red carpet interviews for Next Best Picture, and most recently it has been a couple events, like for-year consideration events for Ted Lasso Season 3, and I just interviewed a lot of the cast on Saturday, so interviews should be coming up very soon, and I love them a lot, so it was fun.
That's exciting. Yeah, me too. Big fan. And then last but not least, we have Brian Formo.
Hi, I'm a Collider alum, so I was there 2014 to 2017. I'm at Letterboxd now. I am an editorial producer for them, which means basically that I produce a number of their videos, do a lot of interviews, podcasts, go to film festivals, and kind of everything that we love about this racket get to do there. So that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of ran into you, I think, right before you got to Letterboxd. And then when you were there, it was a big, neat change. I don't know. I guess we all probably use Letterboxd. And have we all been using it for years now, or have we come to it recently? I know I've been using it since probably the early 2010s.
Oh, I'm a newbie at Letterboxd, so Brian, if you want to give me tips on how to use it, that would be fantastic. I'm just making lists and just reviewing movies as they come, so.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest tip, so actually, I didn't join until 2016, but I didn't become obsessed with it until 2017. And part of the reason I became obsessed is because as I started poking around a little bit, at first I was like, I'm a professional critic. I'm not giving away my reviews for free. But then I just started to discover movies through Letterboxd that I never would have heard of in any other platform. And it was through kind of just poking around and following interesting people, or like looking at their lists or looking at their top 4. And you're like, I don't know what some of this stuff is. And someone who I consider myself a cinephile, if you can find a place that actually introduces you to some like new great movies, which is very, very, very hard to do, that is what won me over to Letterboxd. And so I actually think the most interesting part of it is to kind of poke around other people's stuff. I mean, that's why I'm here, because Aaron and I started following each other pretty early on for me being there. But he's right. It started in like 2010. but it's been a gradual pace. It really started to grow in 2019.
How long have you been there, David?
I think I've been on Letterboxd for like 5 or 6 years, and for the longest time, I was mostly just using it as a way of like keeping my own records, just like so I could reference like here's what I saw when, and here's how I felt about it at the time, and stuff like that. And then the more and more people like that I followed and that followed me, I'd start to like suddenly I get like a comment on something I said, and I'm like, oh right, people can see this, and so I've started to branch out into trying to use the social function and the discovery of other people's tastes and recommendations and stuff as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So there you go. Plug for Letterboxd on the show. I mean, we're big fans, so I have no problem with that. Okay, well, let's get into the reason we're here, and that is to talk about some of the best films of 2023 so far at the mid-year point. We are going to count down from 5 to 1 each. But if a movie is on a list and appears higher on someone else's list, we're just going to skip it. And then we'll talk about it as a group once it comes up at its highest position. And then once we're done, we'll throw out some honorable mentions as well. Anything that you guys have really latched onto this year that you might want to mention that didn't quite make the cut. With that said, I guess we're just going to get started. And Meredith, I have you up first, but then the movie you have in your number 5 spot is going to be talked about later. So we're going to go to Brian, who has something on his list at number 5 that it's the only place it shows up at all.
A little pun there. So yeah.
Oh, I didn't even do it on purpose.
So number 5 for me is Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up. So now everyone gets the pun. If that was a slip of the tongue, that was pretty good. It's just a natural. Yeah. So I guess starting with synopsis, what it is. I mean, it's basically Michelle Williams is an artist outside of Portland, Oregon. She teaches. She struggles at making art because of everything else that is happening in her life, which includes a mentally ill brother, various things odd with her family members, both of her parents, and a landlord who is also an artist played by Hong Chow who won't fix anything. So actually, before we started recording this, we were kind of chatting about where we're from, and part of the reason why I really enjoy Kelly Reichardt movies in general, but this one felt like home to me because many feels like many years ago, 15 years ago, I used to run performance space and art galleries in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then in Olympia, Washington. It was very DIY, and it's like the side of the art scene that kind of never really gets shown in movies, which is like people who are making art just to make art. They're not like, things aren't really getting sold, and it's actually like a place where basically people just come together every Friday to drink wine. So even if you don't like the art and you kind of have to like mend things with each other, like it felt very, very familiar and cozy to me. And I like that there are some pretty heady themes throughout it, but she doesn't hit you over the head with what she's actually getting at. I think it's something that if you sit and kind of have some tea and think about it, you can start to it seems like not much is happening, but if you have the time to actually kind of like parse through various things that are happening in it that are very quiet and subtle, I think it actually reveals to be one of her better works, and I really enjoy a number of her films. I mean, First Cow was my favorite of 2020 as well. So
if anybody else has thoughts on Showing Up, feel free to chime in as well. I have not seen it yet myself,
Nope.
So I'm lagging behind. Oh, we're all shaking our heads. So
We're
I guess we've
failing
got
right now.
one movie in and we've got homework. Great. That's fantastic. No, I liked First Cow a lot, so I'll definitely be checking it out. It's a good pick. All right. David, his number 5 shows up later on the list. So that makes my number 5, which is also only on one list, and it is a movie called Sanctuary. And essentially this is a 2-person stage play-esque single location thriller in a way. I almost want to call it an erotic thriller, but I don't want to set expectations unfairly because it's not got the kind of sexual situations that an erotic thriller usually does. It's much more psychological in nature. It is about a dominatrix played by Margaret Qualley, who is spending a night in a very claustrophobic hotel room with this man played by Christopher Abbott, who is the heir to his father's hotel empire. And as the movie goes on, they go through this incredible series of mind games, and it is just psychotic. There's manipulation, and you never quite know who's got the upper hand. The script is terrific. It has an absolutely wonderful score. The camera work is really special, I think, for being in such a confined space. It's hard to make one or two rooms for 90 minutes look different, but the way that they change the angle of the shots helps really kind of elevate it, I think. And this thing is just, if you are a person that likes good performance, then this is a movie that you will probably enjoy, because Margaret Qualley is just phenomenal in this film. I think, she is in my top 5 actresses performances for the year so far as well. She had me feeling all sorts of ways on a huge spectrum of emotions throughout watching this. And I think that, Christopher Abbott does a fantastic job as well, but the way that she is able to kind of command the screen in this role, this is not like a dominatrix movie like 50 Shades of Grey. So it's not that, it's not like a caricature of that lifestyle. It is much more about control than it is the like sexualization of what a person is doing. And I just found it completely fascinating. Just loved it so much.
I didn't see it, but can I point out how weird it is that Christopher Abbott has now made 2 movies that are like him locked in a hotel room with a sex worker? Because like there was Piercing 5 years ago, which is him and Mia Wasikowska, which is also a like crazy mindfuck of a movie that I loved and saw at Sundance in 2018. But yeah, that's a movie where he's an aspiring serial killer who makes plans to murder a prostitute, and then once he gets into the hotel room with her, it turns into the same kind of mind games and stuff. That's a pretty great movie as well. But weird like niche that he's carving out for himself.
I bet that was probably part of the inspiration for casting him. Honestly, it sounds pretty similar to kind of the type of role that he ends up having to play here. It's really interesting, just the way that the story kind of unfolds. There's parts of it where they're playing roles, they're acting as different characters as part of the contract that they have put in place. And then at other times, they're sort of their real selves outside of the dominatrix relationship. And it's just trying to figure out when that is, and watching it is great. So I highly recommend it.
Have you seen it, Meredith?
No, I have not seen it, though everybody who has seen it seems like they've really enjoyed it, just because it's a little out of my purview that I haven't really sought it out. But I mean, based on that alone, I'm definitely interested in checking it out sometime in the future.
Well, I have seen it, and I'm going to back up something that Aaron is saying, but saying that he can say it with more conviction. So, I mean, I've written thousands and thousands of words on an erotic thriller, and you can definitely call this an erotic thriller because there's blackmail is central to it, and it's about like power dynamics, like you said, but also kind of office dynamics. But because his kink is very closely tied to language is sexy as well. But like, I think that even though it's maybe not a classical, what people think as erotic, it is using something that, is kink for many, which is just like kind of words and being bossed around. And it, and her conviction and kind of seeing her navigate shifts in power, I think it 100% qualifies for that. It actually reminds me a lot of this. I mean, this one has a lot more disrobing, but it does remind me a lot of a French movie from the early 2000s called Secret Choices. Oh, sorry, Secret Things. So I actually I think that that's a great kind of, it's very similar in a lot of ways to Sanctuary, that if you haven't seen that, you should, I would greatly recommend that as well, if you like Sanctuary.
Awesome. Well, I'm putting it on my list. Next would be Meredith's number 4, but it also shows up later, so we'll get to that eventually. She is still here. Brian's number 4 is also only on one list, but that's because probably none of us have had the opportunity to see it yet. At least I'm guessing. So, Brian, go ahead. What's your number 4?
Yeah, so this debuted at South by Southwest, which I actually was not at, but I did do a pretty large. If I mean, maybe I'll plug this at the end. I guess the reason why I was able to see Bottoms early. Bottoms. Does people know what it is? The trailer just came out last week. It's Emma Seligman's follow up to Shiva Baby. It is a comedy of Rachel. It's Rachel Sennett and Io Edebiri, who are uncool high schoolers, which is hard to believe, but they're uncool high schoolers who start a fight club because they want to pick up chicks. So they start a female only like self-defense club to try to get laid. And it's very, very, very funny. The tone is it's an incredibly difficult thing to pull off because, well, I'll toss this out there. So going back to early 2000s, I feel like I've only been on this podcast for about 15 minutes and I've gone back to the early 2000s about 4 times. But Strangers with Candy was a series that I loved. Amy Sedaris. It's a really weird, over the top style of comedy that only some people are over the top and not everybody is, and it's this weird mishmash between that, and that's exactly what Bottoms is. There are some characters who play it straight. There are many who are incredibly heightened. The football players are all wearing their football pads and jerseys everywhere they go, which feels like a very kind of direct callback to Strangers with Candy, but I thought it was hilarious. And it looks great, and the cast is a lot of fun. So it doesn't come out till August 25th, but those who did see it at South by Southwest loved it as well. It's great to see. It'd be great to see with an audience. I didn't get to do that, so I would actually like to go back and do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely looking forward to that. Getting in my Rachel Sennett fix with the Idol, but I'm assuming it's going to be a very different character for her than that.
If she's I'm hoping that she's this generation's Parker Posey, because she is so good at what she does in this particular type of comedy, and she's just like embracing the indie spirit of so many different features that I don't know if she'll get called up to the big leagues, but she seems to like where she's at. But she feels like a Parker Posey archetype.
I was about to say, as somebody who unapologetically loves Josie and the Pussycats and Parker Posey, like hearing that just made me even more excited. And ever since I saw the first trailer for Bottoms, I'm like, yes, this looks absolutely hilarious. So hearing you have it on your list so far and talking it up, it makes me very excited to see it.
Some great needle drops too.
That's good news. Yeah, looking forward to that. All right. Well, our number 4s are the same. So I'm going to let David kick it off, but it is also mine as well.
Yeah, this is a movie that I saw at Sundance. I'm guessing you did, Aaron. That's where we met in person, was at Sundance.
Right.
When, you saw me scarfing popcorn for breakfast at 8 a.m. screening of The Eight Mountains, shoveling popcorn in my face. We saw some other movies too, including Nicole Holofcener's newest film, You Hurt My Feelings, which was one of my most anticipated movies of the festival and did not disappoint me at all. I mean, maybe in the case, like in terms of reuniting Holofcener with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, for my money, one of the greatest comic actors of all time. Reuniting them, I don't know if You Hurt My Feelings quite lived up to Enough Said, which I think is one of the best movies of the 2010s. It's still, they still have great sensibilities together. She has a great eye for casting. I would say this feels even more like an ensemble than Enough Said did. I mean, it's certainly like Julia Louis-Dreyfus is the lead, and her marriage to Tobias Menzies' character is the through line, but the rest of the cast, including the great Michaela Watkins as Julia Louis-Dreyfus' younger sister and Jeannie Berlin as their mom, are all fantastic. There's a certain type of comedy that doesn't seem to get made anymore. Often, if movies are comedies these days, it feels like they're often like high concept or they're comedy action or something like that. But this sort of very like grown up, like talky comedy first type of slice of life type of thing feels like a throwback to the era of American indies that Nicole Holofcener kind of made her name in, and definitely carries on that tradition very well. I laughed throughout the movie. I love seeing Tobias Menzies be funny. He's such like a smoldering, severe looking guy that he often gets, like Outlander or whatever, he gets cast as like stern, either bad guys or hunks or whatever. But I don't know if you were him as like Edmure Tully on Game of Thrones. Like part of the joke of that character was that he looks like he should be the most accomplished knight in the world, but he's a total like feckless loser or whatever. And so here, him playing what should be a very assured, very upwardly mobile, private therapist who happens to actually be very bad at his job, and none of his patients like. So it's a great use of his skills, and he holds his own against. Again, I'm just going to fawn over Julia Louis-Dreyfus. She's one of our great national treasures right now. So that's all these and more are the reasons I loved You Hurt My Feelings.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I didn't love it nearly as much at Sundance as I have come to love it, which is interesting because, we always see people at premieres and the big joke is, well, everybody overrates their premiere experience because they're caught up in the pomp of that.
Well, especially at Sundance, because you've got that like we're all away at camp type of like, and like it's cold outside. It's cold outside. We're all huddled together in the warm glow of the movies and things. Yeah, there's definitely the Sundance glow. I think is even stronger than the normal festival glow.
Yeah, I agree. And yet, I came away from this was my first Nicole Holofcener film. Since I've watched a couple, I've not gotten to enough said. I need to, I know, but I really liked it. And then it lingered. It was one of those movies that I could not stop thinking about. And that means a lot to those of us who watch hundreds and hundreds of movies every single year. And there was just something so realistic about this dialogue and about these characters, something so natural. And the point of the story being to poke fun at how we all lie to spare each other's feelings. It just made me do a lot of self-reflection, and it hit me in a way that I think was it was meaningful. Like, I don't know that it was life-changing, but it truly did get me to evaluate the way that I talk to people and the things that we say, and think about that and why that is, and consider, is that the best decision to be not telling the truth in a given situation? And I think that, I think Holofcener's writing is just absolutely brilliant in the way that she pulls this movie off. It's very slight, but there are no wasted moments, no wasted scenes. And you're right, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is just phenomenal in this. And it's the kind of performance that doesn't usually get a ton of awards attention, but I really hope that she doesn't get forgotten because I think she's that good as well in this one.
I did see it when it opened finally in theaters. I was not at Sundance. I'm not that cool. But I did enjoy the movie. I thought overall it was fine, but I don't think it stayed with me in the same way that it stayed with you, David, and Aaron as well. I do think Julia Louis-Dreyfus is phenomenal as an actress, and I think she had great chemistry with Tobias Menzies. And shout out to the fact that they had David Cross and Amber Tamblyn and couples therapy. I think that was like the highlight of the film for me, was seeing like actual married couple there doing this back and forth. It was just a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, Amber Tamblyn accuses David Cross's character of hating women, and he says, "No, I just hate you." It was one of the more memorable jokes for me.
I saw this at Sundance the first time as well, and I feel like part of the reason why the Sundance glow is so much stronger is because, okay, so this is we're all HCA members. It's the thick of award season. Everyone's tired of talking about the same movies. This is like the first new movies, and so I think that lends itself to kind of overrating or maybe like extra hype about things. I was guilty of with You Hurt My Feelings. Like, we're in the throes of the lead up to the Oscars and be like, I know this is annoying to do, but I really think that Julia Louis-Dreyfus deserves an Oscar nomination for this work. I know we're not even done with the Oscars, but she's phenomenal in it. And that remains true for me today. Yeah. I think it was my favorite. I didn't see a ton actually at Sundance, but I think of everything I saw at Sundance, this was my favorite.
Awesome. Well, it won't be the last Sundance movie to show up here. That's for sure. Meredith, you get to lead something here. So this is your number 3. What do you got?
Oh man, finally. So in my number 3 spot, this was honestly the biggest surprise for me so far this year. Everything else has kind of been like, oh, I knew this was going to be really good, and then it exceeded my expectations. But this one in particular surprised me, and that was Air, directed by Ben Affleck, which of course tells the true story of how Nike was able to make a deal with Michael Jordan and create the Air Jordan. And I really was impressed, first and foremost, by the cast involved, with Matt Damon, Jason Bateman, Ben Affleck himself wearing those awesome sunglasses and that jacket. I mean, who could forget when the trailer dropped for that? But also, like, Chris Tucker as well. And obviously, Viola Davis is always incredible. But here in particular, I was really surprised by the way that they paced the story and told the story, because initially it seemed like we know kind of the mythos around like how these iconic shoes came to be, but the way by which they kind of told it over the course of a weekend or a couple weekends, really making it about the individual people involved, like the unsung heroes, to make this shoe come to be, and how much of a gamble this was at the time. Plus, I mean, it was the 80s, a lot of great needle drops, and I was really surprised of how much of a feel-good movie that this was. I wasn't rooting for it to be a bad movie, but the way people were talking about it, I was like, I don't know, this feels overhyped, but I really did enjoy it. And now the fact that it's on Prime Video now, I'm looking forward to rewatching it again. So that is why Air is on my list.
Yeah, it made us all fall in love with capitalism again.
Okay.
I loved it. I'm guilty. Like, I mean, I loved it as well. So for all of those reasons, I had a blast with it. And I've really enjoyed the run of movies like Air that we've gotten so far this spring. It was like Tetris and Air and Blackberry and just a whole slew of these movies revisiting. Oh, yeah, I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one just came out too as well.
I'll tell you that much.
Oh, it's not.
But I'll also be the lone naysayer, because I really went into Air really wanting to like it. I really like Ben Affleck as a director. I like the cast. I just felt that it was definitely well acted. I thought it was maybe a little overwritten in kind of like a post Aaron Sorkin type of way. And also, Robert Richardson is one of my favorite working cinematographers, and I did not get what he was going for in that movie. It just, I don't know if he's trying to do this, the whole like 80s video thing where it looks kind of smeary and ugly, but I couldn't get behind the look of the movie, unfortunately. It took me out of it, but I'll always show up for director Ben Affleck, you know?
It is a very vanilla kind of staid looking movie, but for me, like, even though this isn't in my top 5, I think that Air is the most fun I've had watching a movie this year, because like 80s and 90s basketball is basically what I feel like that's my superheroes. So like that's for me, there were so many like jokes within this where I was like, I get that reference, I get that, like, oh, this Gonzaga knock, like there's like all these things going on in the film that just like put a smile on my face from beginning to end. And Jason Bateman got one little monologue that got me all teary. This was like my ultimate, I'm not a dad, but this is my dad movie of this year for sure, because like I felt like it was actually speaking to nostalgia that I do have, instead, whereas so much of like the industry is always like catering to someone's nostalgia. I feel like I've kind of skirted past that until Air, but I agree. I'm like Robert Richardson. I don't think it was so much what Richardson was doing, but like kind of Affleck. There were some things that look like a grainy YouTube video occasionally, where it's like, I know that he's trying to make it look like this is what this video looks like from how it was shot then and how it would be on your computer now. But there was somewhere I was like, I don't know that translates that well. But it is about capitalism, but there is, it is the start of a company before they got huge, so it's not like world crushing capitalism. But I do like that it is tied to something that has become more commonplace. And I forget, you're you're a Razorbacks fan, so you probably remember what it's called, but how like
NIL.
NIL, yeah, like
name, image, and likeness.
right.
Yes.
So the progress that we've made for athletes to actually make money on themselves instead of just people make money off them, like that was something that Jordan's mother identified very early on, and I think that is something that has taken so long for everyone else to catch up to. And it's good that we are, but I think that is like a wrinkle within like maybe the other capitalism stories is like, this is like, yeah, Nike got huge because of it, but Michael Jordan like individually did something that it took far too long for others to replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly, and that's a big positive to come out of this, is to elevate that story. Brian's number 3 will show up later. So, David, your number 3, which is a lone entry on the list.
I know it's a lone entry, and I'm putting on my battle armor because I know people who hate this movie really hate this movie. But this is another Sundance movie for me, Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool, which is the worst fun you'll have in the theater all year. Fun's not really the right word. I loved Possessor, his last movie, and I guess this is kind of a theme with these Sundance movies. But like, You Hurt My Feelings, good, not quite as good as enough said. I don't think Infinity Pool lives up to Possessor, but I just want to spend more time in his outlook and his brain and the way that Brandon Cronenberg is obsessed with mutable identity and mutable physical forms, and the way that Infinity Pool especially like blends sort of violence done towards flesh and sex, and the movie is, the sex isn't really sexy, but the violence isn't entirely untitillating. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's a very provocative and challenging movie. And if it's not your thing, it's going to be very strongly not your thing, because it doesn't let up. But I also think it's incredibly funny if you have the right sense of humor. I think Mia Goth is really funny, especially in the early scenes. I'm not sure who all here has seen it, but she's we find out that she's an actress whose main job is those infomercials where it shows people doing normal things but being bad at them. Like, there has to be a better way. So she like demonstrates how to fail on camera. And so there's a lot of like comedy early on, and then throats start getting slit, and there's close-ups of ejaculate, and there's just all kinds of hallucinogenic sex violent dream sequences. It's a really powerful experience that I loved. I know the people who were sitting around me in the screening at the PNI screening in Sundance did not love it. There's one of the big trends in 2022 in movies seemed to be eat the rich, or rich people are crazy. And this movie definitely starts off with that. Like a White Lotus or a Triangle of Sadness, it has to do with rich people and the luxury vacation, and rich people being able to get away with things because of their privilege. But it goes beyond just being about like, isn't it, a shame that these people have this free reign, and get to like, what does it do to a person's psyche to not have any like consequences for your actions, and how far will some people go, and what of themselves will they give up to maintain this consequence-free lifestyle. So I don't know, did anyone else see it here?
I have seen it. Am I the only other one that has?
Yes,
yeah, not my. I've never seen a single Cronenberg for either of them.
Oh, really?
And have no desire to whatsoever.
Agreed.
Sorry, I'm still coming back from that statement.
Body horror is just not my thing. I can't do body horror. I just can't.
That I can understand, but David has some that exist outside of the body horror realm. I think so. Like, I actually think so. Like, David Cronenberg, I think is more cerebral than Brandon. I think that Brandon is trying to outdo the ick of his dad, and I think with like Infinity Pool, it's like I liked Possessor a lot more than I did Infinity Pool. That's the main thing that I would say. I liked the start and where it was going, but for me personally, it got too extreme in the end. So to your end, Aaron, this one was too much for me, and I am actually like a David Cronenberg diehard. So, and it's also like, I think that the points that it was making toward the end were kind of the same as the middle. So like the extremities that it went to maybe didn't land so much for me. But I loved that Mia Goth got to use her real voice, and that she got some moments that like I just remember like seeing this movie and it's like, okay, that's going to be a meme. Like I kind of like when you can spot those types of things in a movie where it's just like out of context, this looks crazy and it is crazy.
The only thing I want to push back against is I think you're ascribing a certain like self-consciousness to Brandon Cordero. He's trying to outdo something. I don't feel that his work is self-conscious. I think it is honest, and this is really just where his peccadillos or idiosyncrasies or preoccupations happen to lie, and he's willing to get all the way into the guts of it.
You grow up as a certain thing, I guess. You know, you're tend to be a product of your environment a lot of ways, no matter what that is. So it's not really surprising that if you grew up with your dad being David Cronenberg and watching all of his stuff and his mind, that you might grow up with some of those same desires to do stuff. So yeah, I've heard lots of. I love that it's on your list, David, simply because it is the kind of divisive movie that, and those are usually the best. You know, something like Babylon last year.
Yeah.
People either loved it or just completely hated it. And those are some of the best ones to discuss. And those mean that filmmakers are trying something. Like they are going for it, all or nothing. And they're okay with a subset of moviegoers just not being interested in their thing. And they're fine with that. And so I like that. I appreciate that, even if I will never, ever, ever watch it myself. My number 3 shows up later or next, I guess. So Meredith, with your number 2, this is also mine and Brian's number 3. Why don't you go ahead and talk about it?
I mean, what can I say? But what's up, danger, guys? Across the Spider-Verse is my number 2. And honestly, if I had seen it one more time, it could have been my number 1, but there's just one that I've held on to a little bit more than that. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is the follow-up to 2018 Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And this movie was delayed, actually. It was supposed to come out a year earlier, but then it was delayed so that they could have more time with the animation. And my goodness, the proof is in the pudding. Into the Spider-Verse was such a big deal of the way that they literally brought a comic book to life in such a fresh and dynamic way, with the music, with the Ben-Day dots, with offset printing, with everything that they were able to incorporate into the Spider-Verse. I didn't think that they could expand upon that in Across the Spider-Verse, and they did. From the opening scene of Gwen Stacy's world to meeting Hobie later on, who is like rocking on the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s. My brain is still trying to figure out like how he actually like exists. But then you have that paired with such a great Spider-Man story about what it means to be Spider-Man. What does it mean in this meta-modern world of like stories that are being remixed? What things are true of characters, what things are different of characters, and how can we expand upon these stories and these characters that we love so much and give them such fresh dynamics and just deeper character relationships. Family, what does it mean for responsibility and to being constantly told no, that you don't have a space, you don't have a place here along these other Spider-Men, and Miles is out there like, no, like I am here. I'm just as much Spider-Man as all of you. And I just am in awe of this movie, of how they were able to create this. It makes me equally excited for Beyond the Spider-Verse. And while I have seen some criticism saying that this movie, like people were unaware that it was going to like, it's a part 2 to a 3-part, story, I would say, like, A, I did know about it, so it didn't come out as a shocker because they announced it so far in advance. But B, I think it really does lend itself that it does feel like a complete story of what they are saying about Spider-Man, not to go into spoilers at all, and the decisions that are made, and especially giving Gwen Stacy, I think, just her character, Haley Steinfeld, who voices her just a lot more in this film, that it's just it's just really refreshing and fun, and I laughed, I choked up, like I went through all the emotions watching Across the Spider-Verse, and that for me is what really gets to me. I am not a horror girly, unfortunately, so Infinity Pool wasn't going to be my thing, but Across the Spider-Verse, like, definitely is.
Brian, why have you got it at number 3?
I mean, this was the biggest surprise for me personally this year because I've seen many superhero movies for work, but I haven't really liked any of them. They always have. I kind of always like the first 90 minutes of most superhero movies, and then the third act is always the same for everything. And then it's like world building for 8 television shows and 4 more franchises. So to Meredith's point, while I enjoyed the animation of Into the Spider-Verse and the animation of Across the Spider-Verse is amazing, Into the Spider-Verse, I kind of like, for me, it ultimately did the same thing that all these movies do in the third act, but this one doesn't. And that's actually maybe what ultimately kept me through to the very end, because it does feel like it's setting up like such a specific blueprint to be contained within. I know they're going to make more, there'll be spin-offs and offshoots, but this does feel like very much like pay attention to this trilogy. And I think I appreciate that they did break it up into 2, not just because it doesn't have, the third act of all the worlds colliding and everyone fighting in different spots and then converging, but by giving it this space of having a part 1 cliffhanger, it gives you way more time with the characters. And I love Miles and Gwen got to have actually to establish more of their relationship. And by the end of it, like, I was like, I can't wait to see what happens next, which I feel like I've never really felt from watching a superhero movie before. Is like, even though it is like kind of like tune in a year from now, I loved almost every second of it. So like this was a big surprise for me, and I really enjoyed it. Why was it number 3 for you?
All of those reasons. We just did a long podcast breaking it down and stuff, so I won't go into too much of repetitive. But like all of the different unique animation styles, I thought were just tremendous, and I love how this one was able to define each character's mood and personality and culture by the animated world that they existed in. Thought that was really special. And like you guys are saying, like, I loved Gwen with all my heart. And the fact that this is essentially a dual protagonist story now, it's not about just Miles anymore. And it's interesting because, we always just assumed this is Miles Morales movie, but it was never called that. It was called Into the Spider-Verse. It was never called Spider-Man Miles Morales. And I think we might have kind of assumed a little too much, because it really is about the verse. And we now have these multiple characters that are leading us through these stories and how they relate. And I just think it's a really fun and interesting way to play with the word canon, which is so important to comic books and to comic book movies and comic book TV shows and the world of media around that and how they are exploring that. And I loved it. I wanted to go back and see it a second time so badly, but I'm waiting for Father's Day so I can go with my kids. It's going to be part of my big day. And so I've held off. But I will give one last plug related to that. If you want to see this in Dolby or IMAX, you have to go right now. So this podcast will be out on a Tuesday morning. You have like 3 days. I wanted to go on Father's Day weekend. This movie would be the third weekend for Spider-Verse, right? It's not on those screens anymore because we've had Transformers, The Flash, and Elemental. It's Father's Day weekend is The Flash and Elemental. Blockbusters are coming out so fast that those screens get eaten up. And it's a damn shame because none of them are anywhere near as close to being as good as this movie. But that's the way it is. So if you want to catch it in a premium format, you've got like a few days to do that, or you're going to miss out, which is a real bummer, I think.
Oh, you're stressing me out because I have to admit I haven't seen it yet. I wanted to see it. I honestly wanted to see it in preparation for this podcast, but I was like on vacation with my wife who does not care about Spider-Man. And then
good choice then. Good choice.
And then, so then I had like a week after I got back, but then I got sick from being on vacation, and I've been like home with a cold for like the past 5 days, and I just couldn't make it work in time. I really wanted to see it in time to do this podcast.
It'll still be there. It's just not going to be in the best formats. And it really does shine in an IMAX or Dolby situation. Like it's a movie that benefits from that in a big way. So yeah, if you got time, do that, but you'll still have time to catch it in a theater, I think.
I did see it in 4DX for the first time, and that was quite the experience. Jumping through the different Spider-Verses, you were swinging through them with it. Not the same experience as when I saw Fast 10. Like, I felt like I was in the cars with them in 4DX, but if you can see it in 4DX, it's also quite the experience.
What is it with, real quick, what is it with all these Spider-Man titles, though? I feel like it's a prank. Like, there you got the, like, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, then you got Into Spider, Across and Beyond. Like, they're trying to, like, keep me from keeping them all straight.
Yes.
Well, because there's so much happening, and there's the dual ownership of Tom Holland's MCU Spider-Man, which is like a hybrid of Sony and Marvel Studios versus like what they're doing in the animated space here. But because Sony has full ownership of it, they're able to explore more with the Spider-Verse, which when you see it, you will know what I'm talking about, because, oh my gosh, I can't believe they were able to get away with what they did.
Yeah. I think that's part of why this movie, not to totally spoil it, but we did mention, it ends on a cliffhanger. That is what it is. And people who didn't understand that this movie was 2 parts, because it's not called Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. It's just called a title, and you would think that it's just going to be a complete movie, but it really is a Part 1 of Part 2 type situation. And so going into it with that expectation, it changes things, but it works, I think, in context of how they told the story. All right, Brian, your number 2, also only on one list, but it's private, so no one can see this, but it's on my Letterboxd short list of like 10 top movies for the year that I was trying to use to pull from. So I do love it.
No, what number is it at?
I didn't keep going. Personally, my top 3 were so far and above everything else. Like I have 3 that I think are those top 3 for me are for sure end of the year top 10 films. No matter what, I don't see them falling off. And then everything else after that is a little bit tighter competition.
Gotcha. So yeah, my number 2, I actually saw last year at TIFF, but it came out this year, and I've seen it again since in this calendar year. But How to Blow Up a Pipeline. So I mean, it's basically it doesn't show you how to blow up a pipeline, but and there is a joke about that. It's based on the manifesto by Andreas Malm about climate change and structural damage is as a way to go, which his manifesto also does not explain how to blow up a pipeline. Just FYI. So you won't get on any watch list by renting this movie. I just think it's a great thriller. It's a great way to crack the code of a very dense academic written work and turn it into basically an Ocean's 11 style movie where it's like a bunch of people who don't know each other coming together to do a heist. But it's told a little bit in the style of Reservoir Dogs, where you meet characters, like it flashes back after you've met them to kind of like how they became part of this group. So you're thrust into them all traveling to Texas to blow up this one pipeline that would disrupt oil prices and change a lot of things. They all have various reasons why. There's also some people who don't want to do it. It's a great young cast. I love how indie it feels. Like it was shot in secret, and you can kind of feel that. It kind of feels like you're watching something that maybe you're not supposed to, or something that like it doesn't feel like a documentary because it's not shot that way, but it does not feel like a studio production. And there's no real sermonizing. It really is kind of about the tense plotting. And there are 2 characters who kind of like keep you guessing about what they're actually there for. That really works really well, in my opinion, as far as the suspense and the thriller aspect of it. But it's a necessary movie to make, in my opinion. It doesn't say like this is the way that things have to be done, but it's saying like, there's no real ideas, and these people have a couple ideas, and here's how they did it. And I just think that it reminded me a lot of I guess early 90s independent cinema movement and how energetic that was. This is a very, very energetic watch to me, and it has a great electronic score that kind of harkens back to some Safdie Brothers type things as well. So I loved it, and I've watched it a couple times, and it still holds true.
Easily one of the most riveting movies I've seen in a long time. I mean, you're locked in from the get-go, every frame, every second. And I think the score does a ton of that heavy lifting as well. It's one of my favorite scores of the year for sure. It's just absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I would echo basically everything you said is why I also responded really positively to it. I just appreciated the movie not trying to mix perspectives to tell a balanced, what audiences might call balanced story. It's like, no, this is what these people believe, and this is how life is for them within their perspective and their views, and watch it and think about it and go about your life.
Yeah, I love the unpolished aspect of that as well, because it's like, yeah, they are in a rundown little shack over by, like, off a dirt road. There's no glamour to anything. There's no Hollywood polish, and that itself, I think, is part of the reason why it works so well.
Like Aaron, it didn't quite crack my list here, but there's nothing I can say against it. I can wholeheartedly endorse the movie and recommend it. You're absolutely right, Brian, that it's marked by a lack of sermonizing. But what I really liked is that on the other side, it also has a complete lack of like conservative, like moralizing. Like I think in a more studio type of atmosphere, or a more mainstream movie, there would be some sort of like getting where the characters are coming from, but ultimately saying like, but it's wrong to damage property, or but it's wrong to break the law. The movie has no like comment on that at all. It's just a heist movie that is about blowing up a pipeline. It does not make any apologies whatsoever for its characters or what they're doing. And I found it really invigorating in that sense, but also just like, yeah, as a heist movie, it's one of the best that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I'm bummed that I haven't been able to see it, but I love a good heist. And I mean, everything that I've seen from it, it has looked really great. And so, yeah, that hearing all of this just makes me like, okay, I need to watch this sooner.
I'll also point out, I think one of the strong points of a movie like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that sort of level of an indie film, I tend to, I think, respond positively to them when there's not an actor I recognize, and there was no one in this movie that I knew. So it felt so much like they were the characters. They weren't just actors playing these characters, but I wasn't watching Tom Cruise leading a group of people to blow up a pipeline and trying to believe it's not Maverick or whatever. Obviously, that's a pretty extreme example.
Aaron, that leads me to believe that you have not seen American Honey, which
I actually
is one of the best movies
not.
of the 21st century so far. So
yeah, didn't it introduce Sasha Lane? Yeah. I knew she was in that, but it's on my watch list. Okay,
yeah.
Well,
and then also the one kid in it is from Blackish. I didn't watch a lot of Blackish, but
Blackish,
one of the
TV show.
Yeah.
Well, it worked for me because I didn't know him.
Hey, see American Honey. If you come away from this podcast with anything, see American Honey. It's a great movie.
It's on my watch list. It has been for a decade, probably. So someday. All right, number 2 for David. Go ahead, and this is not anything like Infinity Pool. I love your list. It's very, very diverse.
Yeah, well, this is also on Meredith's list, I'm seeing, so hopefully she'll have some things to say too. But Kelly Freeman Craig's Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. Because I was a dumb boy, I did not read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret as a kid. I read the Fudge books because that's what boys read or whatever. Kicking myself now for not having read it. But so I didn't really know, I didn't know specifically. I knew it was a movie that dealt with like periods and bras. That's like kind of all I knew. But to go back to reading the Fudge books, I remember like during like reading time in like second grade, annoying my classmates because I was laughing out loud at the Fudge books. And one of the things about Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret that I love is how consistently hilarious it is, but not in a way that is anyway like heightened. There's no bullshit to this movie. It's to get like highfalutin and talk about my general just philosophy of movies or just art as a whole. What I want to see is I want honesty. I want to believe that the artist believes what they're saying. And Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret has no seams in that. There is no self-consciousness. There is an absolute love for these characters. I love how you've got your main girl, and then you've got the other kids at school. And I think in a lesser adaptation or a lesser coming of age movie, there would be like the antagonist, the foil, the bad girl. And there is she does have a friend who turns out to be kind of a shitty friend, but the movie loves her too because she's just a kid going through puberty too. And the amount of love that Kelly Freeman Craig, who also made the great Edge of 17, she's 2 for 2. She's made 2 movies and they're both fantastic. The amount of love she has for her characters, the fantastic performance from Rachel McAdams, Benny Safdie, who is I think has graduated from being a director who acts to just I think he was an actor. I mean, between Licorice Pizza and this, and then Stars at Noon last year he was in. I really love him. And yeah, Are You There, God? It's Me, Morgan. I laughed. I cried. My wife and I saw it in the theater that we were surrounded by girls with their moms seeing it, and I just felt like it was really something. It wasn't just any movie. It felt like a moment, and a movie that I will continue to recommend to people and can't wait to see again. Sorry, Meredith, you saw it too. I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I adore this movie. I actually did not grow up with the book, so that's the reason why it's not higher on my list. Not for any type of reason as I couldn't read it or anything. It just never really came up. But when I told my mom that I was seeing it, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you have no idea how much this meant to me." And I'm seeing that across the board that so many women have connected to this book, and I think the reason why this film just works so well and it just hits the nail on the head of what it means to grow up so well is there's just an earnestness about their natural. It felt very just seen watching it. Yep, I remember I was doing there. Conversation with my friends, and the fact that Kelly Freeman Craig was just able to tap into that again, not just for the Edge of 17 and being a teenager, but being a girl going through puberty is just such a massive thing. And I also really appreciated the way that it tackles faith in this, just because as somebody with a faith background, I think the way that they approached it was so also earnest and not seeing the various backgrounds of just different people and just watching a girl figure out her faith background for herself without any type of, people try to pressure her, but she comes to her own natural conclusion about it. And I just really love that, seeing that just so naturally done. And I mean, I could shout the praises of Rachel McAdams. I've been a fan of her since Mean Girls and Wedding Crashers. So to just see her do so much in this, I know we're so far off from award season, but I really do think she gives such a phenomenal performance in it, and it is worth paying attention to.
High on my list to see. I very much am anticipating it. Edge of 17 is a 5-star. Love coming of age movies in general, and so I literally check, I would say, every 3 to 4 days to see if the stinking $20 VOD price has ever dropped to a reasonable rental amount. I'm just waiting on this thing to hit that. I don't know. I'll do it for $6.99 if you're listening, but I'm not going to rent it for $20. So maybe I should just buy it. I don't know, but I'm very, very excited to see. It's one of my biggest blind spots that I didn't get to before this.
It's also a blind spot for me, but I am looking forward to watching it. I also loved Edge of 17, and I don't even know the Fudge books, but I don't know Judy Blume's books either. But in my New York years, when I was working for Collider, Judy Blume would be at a number of the press screenings, and just the way that my female colleagues would look at her with all I can't believe we're sitting in a theater with Judy Blume is I feel like I should have rushed to see this more than I did. But my wife and her mom just watched it the other day and really liked it. So I will check it out very soon.
All right. My number 2 is higher on someone else's list. So on to our number ones. Meredith, go ahead.
All right, guys. My number one movie so far of this year is Polite Society. First time feature from director Nida Manzoor. Oh my goodness. I cannot get over how great of a film this is. This is a story about two sisters, Pakistani sisters who live in England, and they're both kind of going through some stuff. The younger sister is a wannabe stunt woman, while her older sister just dropped out of art school and just trying to figure out her life. And lo and behold, she starts seeing this man and she gets engaged, but there is other things that ensue. And it's a heist film. It's an action film. It is this deeply tender movie about the power of sisterhood and fighting the patriarchy. It's hilarious. There is so many visual moments to it that just reminds me of an Edgar Wright film or a Quentin Tarantino film with like the different chapter titles and just the stylistic choices made. I believe it premiered at Sundance. I didn't get to see it there. I saw it at a press screening and I couldn't wait to just tell people to go see this film. So also, if you have anything to take away from this podcast episode, please watch Polite Society, because I have been waiting for a film like this to come along that combines all these different genres in a way that just feels just really fun and fresh and just a lot of fun to be had, and makes fun of, she might be doing a Marvel right now, one of the stunt women that the younger sister is super obsessed with. So, and as a fan of Marvel movies, you know, I got a kick out of that.
So this is my number 5. So I also get to talk about how great Polite Society is. Yeah, Meredith, you mentioned Edgar Wright, and that's absolutely the comparison that I would recommend to people, because I think this movie might have benefited a little bit from, fair or not, some lowered expectations for me, because I was one of the contrarian assholes like last year who did not like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and so I went into Polite Society thinking, here we get another family drama that's going to be like transfused through martial arts. It's going to be like knowing and winky and proud of itself, but it's not like that. And none of the problems that I had with Everything Everywhere All at Once I had with Polite Society. These characters are so real and so flawed. The movie understands they're flawed. The movie doesn't try to, like, it actually, in that Edgar Wright, like early Cornetto trilogy type of way, Nida Manzoor does a great job of introducing the genre elements of these like martial arts fights without breaking the reality in a way, which maybe is one of the problems that I had with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Not that I didn't mean to turn this into my opportunity to slag off Everything Everywhere All at Once, but it was a big part, I think, probably unfairly, of what I had in my mind going into this, and I was so pleased with how much this movie respected its audience, how much it respected the genres it was paying attention to, and also you mentioned, Nida Manzoor is great. I meant to call up the names of the two sisters because it's fantastic performances from Priya Kansara and Ritu Araya.
Yes,
they're both so great, and really so much of the movie is carried by them. And so it was my number 5, not my number 1, but it definitely gets the award for most pleasant surprise of 2023 so far for me.
I saw it. It was fine. It was enjoyable. It was fun. I noted in my Letterboxd thoughts that I wish that this was a movie that was on Netflix. This is, to me, what something like Netflix should be doing. Something that actually has a little bit of a quality to it, and that is really great family film material, in my opinion, that is not just a typical story. It's unique and interesting and fantastical. And I agree that the performances were really good. And I just like the aesthetic of it. That was probably my favorite part, was just in general, the way that it was depicted visually was a lot of fun.
And I also just like how much of a tight script it was, honestly. There were like a lot of little things that were paid off, which is like another reason why I'd like compare it to Edgar Wright, because his scripts are really tight as far as like little moments that he brings up at the beginning end up having like meaning later down the road, or it gets paid off in really funny ways. And Polite Society also does that with like such precision, and it's really cool to see, especially from like a female director too. Like we talk about like male directors who have like such a unique style, and so to have Ida Manzoor come around and do something at that level is just really exciting.
Brian, did you get a chance to see this one?
I did. I would just say it's not for me, and I don't want to. I don't want to deprive anyone of their top
yeah
with that, because I don't think it was for me from the start. So it was just very much like Edgar Wright is also not for me. So it's that. Yeah.
Okay, so that has got to be almost on the. That's got to be on the level of what I said. If I can get roasted for not being a David Cronenberg guy, you can get roasted for not being an Edgar Wright guy.
At least you've seen the Edgar Wright movies, though.
Oh, that's fair.
Thanks for backing me up.
David, you can still get roasted.
So moving on to our next pick, Brian's number 2 of 2023, which technically is probably a 2022 movie, but
it's one of those things. Like I'm a little more stingy on award season dating. So like, yeah, Return to Seoul had a New Year's Eve release date that was not marketed anywhere just so it could qualify for Oscars, but it was marketed everywhere for a February release date that it was going to play, and all of the interviews, everything was for February. It's a 2023 movie through and through on the US calendar, with the exception of just being eligible for an Oscar that it was not nominated for. So that's like a little minor pet peeve of mine about how we kind of do year-end lists, and maybe that comes a little bit from, I mean, it's gaming the system, but also like I grew up primarily in Boise, Idaho. I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. I lived in all these places where you had to wait months for things, and so I think it's more like when they tell you a movie is going to be there, which is like every email, every poster, every trailer for this was February 2023. So that is my pretentious but also maybe of the people response at the same time. But it's also a movie that many people have not seen, so I get to plug it. So it is a French-Korean film by a French filmmaker of Korean background, Davy Chow. It centers on a woman who, she says she's French. She's grown up in France, but she was born in Korea and given up for adoption very early on. And she goes there in her 20s, and you assume that it's going to be like, trying to find a parents type narrative, but you actually don't even know that is what she is doing for like the first 20 minutes. You're observing her as a character first and foremost, and her impulsiveness and kind of her charm. But then you later start to see how that impulsiveness and charm actually has like a really ugly side as well. And all the choices that she is making is kind of out of discomfort of not knowing herself. There is a film that many people are talking about now that I actually think it's very similar to, which is Past Lives. I personally kind of prefer the approach here because we always see her with Past Lives. What I would say, the reason why I haven't connected with it as much as others is because you're mostly kind of viewing the main character as the men who love her kind of like look at her. We don't get to see her interact with many other people. It's just them. In Return to Seoul, you don't know this going in, but it actually charts a lot of time. Like I think it's a decade in the end, and it's these very small differences that she changes about herself along the way, but still kind of has like this impulsive unreliability that will pop up, and it's like she's just continuously reinventing herself and trying to like make herself find more where she's at, and she's drawn to these roots that she doesn't know. And it's very much about like when you're looking for an identity and how you kind of lash out around with other people because you feel like you don't know yourself, that you take it out on others. And I think it's not as much of a fun film, or like as a feeling kind of like leaving on a high, like, well, I wouldn't say that Past Lives does that. Anyway, that Past Lives is coming. I just think if people loved Past Lives, I would strongly urge to check out Return to Seoul, because it actually has a lot of similar beats around time and identity, but in a completely different way that it kind of they speak to each other very, very nicely in that way. So since a lot of people are loving Past Lives right now, then I'm gonna say 2022/2023's Return to Soul.
Well, I'll not to piss you off, Brian, but I'll say the only reason Return to Soul wasn't on my list is because it was on my top 10 movies of 2022 list. I agree. It's magnificent, and the lead actress,
Park Ji-min,
Park Ji-min, who had apparently never acted before, is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. She has to carry the whole movie, and it's definitely not an easy performance to do. Like the way that her character beats kind of change like at a snap of a finger. Which what does she call it? Finding, I forget it. There's an actual term that they use.
Yeah, I loved it as well. It was in my top 5 for international last year, and she was in my top 5 for actress as well. I thought it was fantastic, and just anytime a character can make me pretty much hate them and come around to feeling sadness or empathy for them, I think that is brilliant. I love going through the ringer like that, and I mean, I was cringing at this character early on. I had some real issues with her choices, and of course that's good acting and good storytelling. Because by the end, I was just wrecked and devastated by her. It also is pretty stylish. I think that's where it may differ from Past Lives. Past Lives is very, Celine Song was a playwright, and so it feels, I think, much more like a stage play in a lot of ways than this. To me, is a little flashier at times. There is, in particular, the karaoke scene. I just will never forget. It's awesome, and it has a really great soundtrack as well, especially for a film that you just might not be expecting that from. So yeah, I think it's a good pick. I'm glad you decided to highlight it. Did you see it, Meredith?
I have not, but basically what I've learned from this podcast is like my watch list that never ends. It's just getting more stuff is just getting added to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. This is a movie I would not have seen, and I think probably most of us wouldn't have seen if it hadn't come in. I think was it the Neon box set. So I think we all probably got it at the end of the year in award screener time. Like I didn't know it existed until that. It just showed up at my door, and I was able to check it out.
It was not.
I did go to a theater.
Really?
To see it.
Sony Picture Classics.
Sony Picture Classics, not Neon.
If it was Neon, it probably would have been on more lists.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, it's funny that you said what you said, because David is going to kick off with his number 2, the movie that you just
my number
mentioned, and that is on, or sorry, his number 1. Sorry, that is on other lists. My number 2, Meredith's number 5.
Yeah, this is Celine Song's Past Lives, the movie that Brian just absolutely shat all over just a second ago. No, if I have a bone to pick with anything anyone said, it's Aaron saying that the movie feels like a play. I understand what you mean in that, whereas Return to Soul has a very active camera, Past Lives very much, centers characters talking to one another. But I do think it's a beautifully photographed film, and the score and music are beautiful, to overuse that word. There's Brian talked about time and how much time plays a part in both Return to Soul and Past Lives, which is also about a woman who was born in Korea. Then she was not adopted. She immigrated to Canada, and when we catch up with her, she's an adult living in New York City and is married, right? Yeah, married to a white man, and then her childhood best friend / maybe crush comes to visit New York City. That's the story of the movie, and so it's definitely, we see a few flashbacks, but a lot of, I think, the time that has passed, the movie conjures up, comes from Greta Lee, who's an amazing. That seems to be the through line of this podcast is amazing lead performances. But Greta Lee is also a surprise because she's someone that I know from comedy. She was on like High Maintenance, and she was on Girls at one point. Like I think of her as a comic actress, and there's so much weight and longing behind her eyes in this movie. And Celine Song knows how to use. Sorry, Aaron, I'm going to keep defending this movie cinematically, because Celine Song knows how to use time, not just as I'm talking about the time that has passed between these characters, but letting scenes breathe and letting scenes play out in real time. It doesn't have a climactic fight scene like Polite Society does, but what I would consider sort of the centerpiece scene of the movie is Greta Lee, her husband, and her old friend go to a bar together, and it's just a quiet scene of three people talking, but then someone goes to the bathroom, so it's two people alone, and it's just that alone is, I think, the best, most beautiful scene I've seen in a movie in 2023. So yeah, I'll stop talking because it's on other people's lists too.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the way it's shot. I just think it's different than Return to Soul.
Yeah,
I
very
did
different.
not mean that in a negative light at all. I adore it. I think it's a phenomenal, phenomenal movie that sticks with you. It's kind of the key for all of my top three is they lingered with me and wouldn't get out of my brain. The final shot in this film, which I definitely am not going to spoil, is constructed in a way that is just true brilliance from a storyteller and filmmaking perspective when you kind of understand what is happening with the way characters are moving within the frame and what it means. And I just thought that this is such an achingly emotional drama. It's something that is really easy for a lot of people to relate to. A lot like You Hurt My Feelings in the sense that it made me reconsider my own life and the choices that I make and the choices I have made and what that means. And I think that one of the special things I should say that stood out to me, other than Greta Lee's performance, which is next level. I am not familiar with her from comedy. So now I actually want to go back and watch and see. I can't even fathom that, to be honest. Like it blows my mind to hear that because all I know is Nora here. And what else really worked for me was just the way in which we have sort of this, it's not a love triangle. It is a relationship triangle in a sense, but it is handled differently than pretty much any other story that you would ever imagine could handle that. It's mature, it's respectful of each other, and it's challenging. And there's no easy answers. It's not as simple as like, oh, the grass is greener on the other side, so we're going to do a thing and then we're going to have a problem because that happened and then we're going to have a makeup scene. It's not about that. It's about the exploration of these feelings that no one really fully kind of understands and being okay with that and living within that uncertainty and trust and just so many emotions that you go through watching this beautiful, beautiful movie.
Yeah, I actually just saw the film for the first time this past weekend, and I ended up running into a friend of mine on the street, which was like really random, but like I was still emotionally processing what I had just watched. It was something that I really needed to be in my head about, just the way like how they were able to tell, how Celine was able to tell a story that like she wrote, and it comes from her own experience, which I'm like, how were you able to like put this in and make it into craft the script in such a way that just really like pulled out a lot from me watching it. I definitely started tearing up at the end. I will not give away the final shot, but it was just so devastating in the best way possible. I listened to the score again today. Christopher Bear and Daniel Rawson do an amazing job with the score. I really love it. And also shout out Greta Lee. It's incredible just the amount of like she's able to convey like just the smallest little glances that just like speaks volumes. But B, she was also in Across the Spider-Verse, so good job for her. Like 2 back-to-back performances or in films that are getting a lot of acclaim right now from our community. So I have nothing else to add, honestly. You both have said it eloquently enough, but I just can't believe like I was expecting to enjoy it, but I wasn't expecting it to move me the way that it did.
Well, I did want to clarify because I did really like Past Lives. I think I was maybe expecting to feel swoon or feel more heartbroken than I did in the end. I think for me, because it like the flashbacks maybe didn't build this as much as I had hoped. It kind of to me felt like it was almost like the Before trilogy in one movie. But I agree that the modern set scenes, and particularly that bar scene and the ending, were very, very well executed. And the dynamic between the three was the most interesting. And I kind of wish that it was more of the film instead of kind of an act, because exploring that, I think, what was like that was when it started to like hook me into the film, and it was a little bit closer to the end. But this, going back to Sundance things, because this was like I didn't see it at Sundance, and it was, everyone was saying it was the best thing at Sundance. So I think maybe by the time I sat down, hearing how devastating it was, maybe it was like expecting a certain thing, but the way that she navigates how our choices, kind of like very small choices, just constantly make us have what ifs, but it's never really like what ifs like wanting to explore, like you're saying, Aaron. It's like it's a what if that just kind of lingers, and you don't even know if you want the if. And those areas of the film, I think, were very, very, very well done. I should probably see it again to see now, because like hype is hype.
You're not wrong. It can affect things in a major way. And it was the second best thing at Sundance, at least according to me, because my number one also was something at Sundance. Didn't premiere at Sundance. David already mentioned it because it's where I met him, eating his bucket of popcorn at 8 o'clock in the morning as we both sat down bright and early to watch a 2.5-hour Italian drama. It was not any expectation going into this. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was really worried that I had made a poor choice and I wasn't going to be able to stay awake and keep my attention. But this is The Eight Mountains. It's a film that has not made it out theatrically quite yet. It's coming. It's really done all of the festivals at this point. It just played here at Seattle International Film Festival as well, after debuting at Cannes in 2022 and actually winning a jury prize there. And then it seems to just kind of slowly rolling out from there. It is, as I said, it's an Italian drama, and it is about two 12-year-old boys who meet in this alpine village, one of which is from the city and on vacation, and one of which lives there. And they have unique situations with their parents, specifically their fathers, that have influenced their upbringing and their outlook on life. And essentially, over the course of about 2.5 hours, the directors, a married couple, Felix von Groningen, probably I'm going to butcher the names, and Charlotte Vandermeesch, take us on just an incredible journey of male friendship and bonding. And I have always wanted more of that in cinema. It's something that I don't feel like we get a lot of. And this was just absolutely devastating to me in the best way. It depicted these two men over the course of their entire lives. We drop in and drop out of different time periods, their struggles, their romantic relationships, their dreams, achieving their dreams, losing their dreams, just basically the bigness and the smallness of their lives. It's all there. And through everything, they remain just inexplicably drawn to each other and drawn to this place. And if you have a love of the outdoors, if you're a hiker, and when we talk about like setting of film festivals, we watch this at Sundance, and I walk out of the theater and I look up and I see the mountains, the snowy peaks, like right there staring at me. And that's what this movie is full of. It's just absolutely exquisite, just beautiful photography. It is all on location. It's all real. It was hard to get. I've listened to so many interviews about this, the valleys, the lakes, the waterfalls, the mountains. It's immense, but you're telling this simple story within this incredibly huge, just amazing, vast landscape around them. So everything about this worked for me. I walked out of it and I was incredibly moved, and I was like, wow, that I can't overrate this. And I haven't gotten a chance to rewatch it. I actually got a link to rewatch it out of Seattle International Film Festival, and I let it expire before I got to it. I was so sad, but this is above all the movie I just have not let go of. It's lingered. It's like past lives, but even more so has just stayed with me. I think because of the rareness of that truly unique, loving, sacrificial male friendship at the center of it. Anyway, I was just blown away by this movie.
Yeah, obviously I've seen it too. As we talked about, I also really loved it. I liked it. I can't remember what the word was exactly that you used, but I think you talked about them being sort of inexplicably drawn back together, and I think that it's very honest about friendship in that way, that like the characters, these two characters don't necessarily go on the journey of finding themselves together. They kind of find who they are at their own pace, and sometimes that causes friction between them, but there is that eternal bond between them. I was overjoyed in how much I liked this movie because Felix Van Groningen. So Charlotte Vandermeer, this is her directorial debut, but Felix Van Groningen, he had made a movie in 2012 called The Broken Circle Breakdown, which is great, but I am gonna, if you haven't seen it, I'm gonna warn you, high on the list of saddest movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, legitimately be warned. It's just a heartbreaking, crushing movie. And so but I was really into him because I didn't see Belgica, but then he came to America and made a movie called Beautiful Boy that I thought was terrible, with Steve Carell and Timothy Chalamet. So I'd been like, oh, maybe he's lost it. So I was happy to, maybe it was Charlotte Vandermeer who righted the ship, but I was happy that he went back to making good movies.
I doubt anybody else. Maybe Brian, did you catch it?
I did not, but sounds right up my alley. That was actually, I had a ticket for it at Sundance, but I didn't go.
I'm not surprised. Well, that's the thing. Like, it's such a, it's not, there was no hype around it. Nobody was really talking about it. I was surprised David was there. There wasn't a huge crowd. It was just,
there were very few of us there.
We got lucky that we went, that we went and saw it. So, but I've got to talk about it every chance I can get, so that I feel like if I just keep mentioning it on social media and on podcasts, that I say the words, The Eight Mountains, eventually it will be in a theater or streaming somewhere, and people will be like, oh, Trigger, Aaron talked about that, I should watch it. All right. Well, thank you guys. So real quick recap, the movies with them. Well, let's go down the list. Meredith had at number 5, Past Lives. Her number 4, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Her number 3, Air. Number 2, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And her number 1 was Polite Society. Brian's list, number 5 was Showing Up. Number 4, Bottoms. Number 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Number 2, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Number 1, Return to Seoul. David's list, number 5 was Polite Society. Number 4, You Hurt My Feelings. Number 3, Infinity Pool. Number 2, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And number 1, Past Lives. And then my list, number 5 was Sanctuary. Number 4, You Hurt My Feelings. Number 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Number 2, Past Lives. And number 1, The Eight Mountains. Movies that were on multiple lists, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret was on 2. You Hurt My Feelings was on 2. Polite Society was on 2. Surprise for me there. Thought that was cool. Spider-Verse was on 3, and Past Lives was on 3. Any honorable mentions you guys want to just real quickly throw out there as little recommendations for folks to check out that maybe they haven't already? I'm just going to randomly, Meredith.
All right, I'll be very quick with this. Emily, check that out. Fast 10, check that out in 4D if you care about the Fast franchise at all. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I adore that movie. James Gunn has ended that trilogy so well for me, and I love it. And last but not least, Cocaine Bear by Elizabeth Banks. I kind of wish it was a little gorier, honestly, but I had such a delightful time watching Cocaine Bear.
I love it. That's what this is meant for. Just go nuts. David, do you have any?
Yes, absolutely. I have a few. A.V. Rockwell's 1001, kind of keeping with our theme of movies that take place over a long period of time, with a terrific lead performance by Tiana Taylor as a woman who gets out of prison and sort of reclaims her son from the foster care system and does so outside of the law. And we see the fallout of that over the course of many years. That's a great movie. I was really pleasantly surprised by Laurel Parmet's The Starling Girl, which is a movie about a girl growing up in sort of an oppressive and cloistered religious community. But I think, to go back to what I was saying about things like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, the lack of like judgment, I think, on the part of the movie, and the lack of like making her like, oh, she's the obvious outsider who knows the rest of these people are wrong. Like, you see how she's like, the community is wronging her in many ways, but also she's invested in it and gets a lot out of it. The movie was way thornier than I thought it would be. And then, this is a left field pick. I don't know if anyone has seen it. I just watched it the other night. Super low budget horror movie called Brooklyn 45.
It's written and directed by a guy whose name I don't know how to pronounce, Ted Geoghegan.
I asked him because I butchered it in my review, and I emailed my link to him, and I was like, "Hey, by the way, just I probably ruined your last name," and he said it's pronounced Gagan, like Reagan,
right?
And I
or
was
like
like,
Stephen
never
Reagan.
would have guessed that.
Yeah, a name that I recognize because he's also a publicist, and I've been getting emails from him for years. But yeah, I didn't know what to expect about Brooklyn 45, which is a horror movie on its surface, but is a sort of uses the fallout from the Second World War. It's about a group of World War II vets who get together for the first time since the war, and one of their wives has died who was a member of this group, and he wants to do a seance to bring her back, and things go haywire and they end up stuck in this room. But it uses that sort of immediate post-World War II idea of America and the Greatest Generation and stuff like that to sort of examine the loyalties and prejudices and paranoia that continue to be a part of America today, and it does it through I think some really great period costume and production design work, and some fantastic performances especially from Anne Ramsey, and also the general who wants to do the seance is played by Larry Fessenden, which is how you know that you're watching a worthwhile independent horror movie. If Larry Fessenden is in it, that's sort of the imprimatur. He has blessed the movie by being in it. So yeah, I thought Brooklyn 45 was a delightful surprise for me.
Awesome. Anything for you, Brian?
Yeah, for things that haven't been mentioned, Ira Sachs Passages, which will come out on Mubi, I think, in August. It is, it is another Sundance kind of love triangle. Franz Rogowski is he is a himbo director caught between Ben Whishaw and Adele Exarchopoulos. Thinks he can have it all, and I guess you have to see how that turns out. Very, very, very frank sexuality, lengthy sex scenes. So if you're one of those who thinks that doesn't advance the plot, that's pretty much the whole plot of Passages is how this is how the sex scenes inform certain decisions upon one character.
Mine, I had a couple of just misses for the consideration of top 5. All, I believe, Sundance movies, actually. One is Radical. It's about a teacher. It's a true story about a Mexican grade school teacher and the way that he comes into a very struggling school and a community where the kids are all dealing with all sorts of crime and poverty around them, and reinvigorates it with a unique style of teaching. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. Performance is wonderful by Eugenio Derbez. And I actually just noticed on Wikipedia that it apparently got picked up by IFC. So that makes me happy. And hopefully it will actually come out, because I really do think it's just a wonderful feel-good movie that elevates the importance of teachers. And it's also very, very funny. Documentary-wise, 20 Days in Mariupol, it's hard to put on a top 5 list just because of how hard it is to watch. But it's a movie about Ukraine and what happened to them when they got invaded, from boots on the ground reporting and footage. And it is staggering stuff that is extremely hard to stomach, but very important type of documentary filmmaking that I respect a lot. And then Theater Camp, which should be coming out into theaters pretty soon, sometime in the summer, I believe. I actually just got an email about a press day coming up the end of this month. So
Mid-July.
Excellent. Yes. It was the only movie I watched twice while I was at Sundance. I almost watched it back to back. Yeah, just phenomenal fun if you have any interest whatsoever in the theater world, in musicals and plays and such. It's such a good time. And I think that audiences, when it comes out, I think people are going to go nuts for it. It's going to be a big, big hit. All right. Well, thank you guys again for being here. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. We've got to talk about a ton of different movies, which is always the best part of this. Give out the recommendations for things that people should check out. But I want to give you guys a mention real quick before you leave, or time to tell people where they can find your work on the internet and various other publications. So we'll start with you, Brian. Where can people find whatever it is you want them to find?
What do I want them to find? Well, it's all on Letterboxd in some way, whether it's my account on Letterboxd, which is Brian Formo, or if you follow any of our socials or YouTubes, you will unwittingly be watching or listen to our podcast. If you consume anything that Letterboxd has made, you're probably consuming something that I have worked on. The one thing that I did want to, because the Bottoms was in my top 5, tomorrow going to put out a very lengthy chat with Emma Seligman talking about Bottoms to Zoe Lister-Jones, who starred in a movie that no one brought up in this podcast, but Beau is Afraid. So look for that. It's a great chat. That's my plug for, this comes out Tuesday. It's the same day.
All right. Meredith, where can people find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Still figuring out how to use Letterboxd at Meredith Loftus. You can find features of mine on Collider or some reviews of mine on Next Best Picture. And I do have some Ted Lasso interviews coming out sometime this week that will be on Next Best Picture's YouTube page. So check that out.
Awesome. And David?
The podcast is called Battleship Pretension. Wherever you find podcasts, it's also battleshippretension.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Davy Pretension. That's Davy with an EY, Davy Pretension. And Letterboxd, David Bax.
All right. And all my links to different social channels and the podcast and stuff are always in the show notes to each and every episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'll be back soon. Until then, keep watching and keep feeling film.